Hey there, how's it going everybody? In this video, we're going to be learning how to scrape websites using the Request HTML library. Now, I've done a video on web scraping before using Beautiful Soup, which is one of the more popular tools out there, but Request HTML is a newer project written by Kenneth Wrights, and he's the same person who wrote the Request library. And he has a history of writing libraries that are easy to use and pretty intuitive, so I figured we'd give this library a look to see how we can scrape some web data. Now, if you don't know what it means to scrape websites, basically, this means parsing the content from a website and pulling out exactly what you want. So, for example, maybe you want to pull down some headlines from a news site, or grab some scores from a sports site, or monitor some prices in an online store or the stock market or anything like that. So to show you an example of this, let's take a look at the finished product that we'll be building in this video, and then we'll actually learn how to build it. Now this is going to be very similar to the script that we built in the Beautiful Soup video, but also I'm going to show how we can do some more advanced parsing, such as grabbing dynamic data generated by JavaScript and how to make asynchronous requests and things like that. So if I go over here to my personal website, I have a homepage that has posts of my most recent videos. And every post that I have has a title with this big heading tag here. And then I have some text of the summary of the video, so a description of the video. And then I have the embedded YouTube video here. So let's say that we wanted to write a scraper that would go out and grab this information. So we wanted to grab the post titles, the summaries, and the links to the videos. And we just wanted to ignore all this other stuff here. So to show you what this would look like, let me run the finished script that we'll be writing in this video so that you can, see what something like this can do and what it's capable of. And then we'll actually learn how to build it. So I have a script here. If I'm just going to run this, it's cms_scrape.py. So if I run that script with Python, then you can see that it went out to my website and pulled down a bunch of information from my homepage. So these are the latest videos that I have, and it grabbed the title here, and it grabbed the description, and it also grabbed the link to the YouTube video. Now, not only did it print this information out here within the terminal, but if I go to the directory where this script lives, then it also created this CSV file here. So if I open up this CSV file, I'm on a Mac, so this is going to open this in Numbers by default. Yours might open in Excel if you're on Windows. But we can see that it pulled down this information within a CSV file too. So we have the headlines, the summaries, and then the video link over here. Now we could reformat this here a little bit to be a little bit better. So I will set the column here to 300 point instead. And then I'll also turn on word wrap. So turn that on. Okay, and now that's a little bit easier to read there. So this is what you can do with a script to scrape websites like this. Now, if we were to try to parse this information with Python alone, then we'd probably run into a lot of issues. But luckily, we have libraries like Python HTML that makes parsing out all this information a lot easier to do. So let's go ahead and get started and see how to do this. So first, we need to install Request HTML. So I'm going to pull my terminal back up here. Now, we can do this with a simple pip install. It's just pip install, and that is request-html. Now I already have mine installed here, but yours would install there. And once we have that installed, let's look at a very basic example to get us started, and then we'll work up from there. Now, you don't have to be extremely familiar with HTML in order to scrape websites, but it definitely helps. Basically, HTML is structured in a way where all of the information is contained within certain tags. So if you're familiar with, XML, then it's very similar to that. So I have an extremely simple example here, a basic HTML file, and I have one open here in my browser. And we can see that this small example here just has one big header that says test website. And then we have two large links here for article 1 and article 2. And then we have a summary underneath for both of those articles. And then we also have a footer down here. And also I have something that says this text is generated by JavaScript. So this is how you're probably used to seeing browsers display HTML, but in the background, the source code looks a bit different. So let me switch over to the HTML code of this simple website here to see what this looks like. So I have this open in Sublime Text. I'm going to make this half screen here. And actually, let me make this website a little smaller here so that we can see a bit more of this HTML. So we can see how this is structured here. So we have these tags throughout our documents. So there are opening tags, which are surrounded by these brackets here. So for example, if I look at the head, then we can see that these angled brackets, this is the opening tag, and the closing tag is the same thing, except it has a / here right after this. So this is the opening head tag, and this is the closing head tag. And these tags can also be nested. So if we want to find our article headlines and our article summaries, then we can look down here in the body tag. And within the body tag, we have our test website heading here. And then we have a div tag right below this. And that div tag has a class of article. And those classes are mainly used for CSS styling and can also be used within JavaScript to identify specific elements. So within that div tag with the class of article, we have our article information. So we have an H2 tag here, which is the heading of our article. And within that H2 tag, we have an anchor tag, which is a link. So this is a link to article1.html with the text of article 1 headline. And then below that, we just have the paragraph tag with the summary of our article. So we can see how the structure of these websites can look confusing, but when you dig down a bit and actually look at the structure, then the structure usually repeats. So for example, with our second article here, it has exactly the same structure as the one above it. So we have a div with a class of article, heading 2, and this one goes to article2.html with an article 2 headline as the text. And then below that, we have a paragraph tag and a summary for article 2. So these are very similar here. We have our article 1 div here and our article 2 div here. So let's use this very simple example to see how we can parse out information using requests HTML. So let's say that we wanted to parse out the article headlines and also the summaries for our website and nothing else, just the article headlines and the summaries. So in this example, it's just going to be article 1 headline and its summary text, and then the article 2 headline and its summary text. So I'm going to open up a blank file here, and I just called this file rhtml-demo. And now we can parse the HTML within this script. Now we can parse HTML in multiple ways. So we can either use an HTML session to go out and pull HTML from a website, and we'll see how to do that in just a minute. But we can also just parse HTML directly. And that's so I have it saved as a file on my machine. So that's what we're going to do right now. So for now, we're just going to parse this simple.html file, and that file is located in the same directory as this script. So if you'd like to download this simple.html file to follow along, then I'll leave a link to this code in the description section below. Okay, so now let's go ahead and open this file and pass it into requests HTML. Now, first, we're going to want to import the HTML class from requests HTML. So at the top here, I'll just say from requests_HTML. So that's an underscore. Whenever we pip installed it, it was a dash, but when we're actually using the module, it's an underscore. And now we can say import HTML. Okay, and now let's open the HTML file and pass the contents of that file into the HTML class. So we'll say with open, and this file was called simple.html, and that's what this site is over here. And this is saved, this HTML file is saved in the same directory as my demo here. Okay, so now I can open that as HTML file, and within this with block here, I'll say source is equal to HTML file.read. So we're grabbing the contents from that file. And now let's pass that into the HTML class. So I'll say HTML is equal to HTML, and HTML is equal to this source, which is the contents of that HTML file. Now, if working with files is new to you and you want to know more about how we opened and read the contents of that HTML file, then I do have a video that goes into a lot further detail on working with files. So I'll leave a link to that video in the description section below if any of you would like to learn more about that. Okay, so now we have an instance of this HTML object here. So first of all, we can access the HTML of this object just by printing out the HTML attribute. So I'll just say print HTML.html. So this is the HTML attribute of this instance that we just created here. So if I save that and run it, then I'll make this a little larger here. we can see that we have all of the HTML from that simple website. Now, if we just wanted the text from the HTML without the tags, then we can use the text attribute. So I'll say print HTML.text. If I save that and run it, then we can see that now we just have the text of the website with the tags taken out. Now, dynamically generated data comes out a bit weird at the bottom here. If we look at this, this is the text from our website that is showing up here that says this text is generated by JavaScript. Now, we're going to take a look at that further in just a bit, but let's not worry about it right now. Okay, so now let's find out how we can parse out that information that we want from this HTML. So let's say that we wanted to grab the title of our HTML page. So if I look at the title tag of this HTML up here at the top, then we should get this here where it says test-a sample website. So in order to get the title, we can simply do something like this. So I'm going to say match is equal to, and I'm going to do html.find. And with this find method, we just want to find title. Okay, and now we can print out that match. So if I save that and run it, then we can see that it prints out this list of elements here. Now, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with CSS selectors, but those are how you specify what you want to find. And I like that a lot because it's something that a lot of developers might already be familiar with. So this right here, what we passed in the find is the CSS selector that we would use to find that title. And when we printed out that match, it gives us this list of elements. And this list only has one element. So that's probably our matched title. So instead of printing out the whole list, let's instead print out only that first element. So I'm going to print out match and access that 0 index there to print out the first one. And I will run that. And now I just have this element. And with these elements, we have access to a lot of the same attributes and methods that we had before. So we could find additional elements within here if this were nested. We can view the HTML, or we can simply view the text. So if I wanted the HTML, then I could just say print the HTML of that element. If I save that and run it, then we can see that we get the HTML of that title tag. And if we only wanted this text without the HTML tags, then we can use text instead. So instead of printing HTML, I'll print text, save that and run it, and we get the title of our website. Now, instead of accessing that first element of that matched list, we could instead just tell our find method that we only want the first match, and it will just return that first match instead of a list. So instead of accessing this 0 index here, I'm just going to remove that. And instead, in our find method, I'm just going to say first is equal to true. And now that match won't be a list of elements. It'll just be the first element that gets found with that search. So if I save that and run it, then you can see that we get the exact same thing. Now, like I said, the find method uses CSS selectors. So if we wanted to get an element by a certain ID, then we can use the #. So for example, if we wanted to grab the div with the ID of footer, then I could simply say $footer, and now it's going to return the element that has the ID of footer. So if I save that and run it, then we can see that we get that footer information. Okay, so now let's see how we'd get those article headlines and summaries from our HTML. Now, most of the time, you aren't going to want to look through all of the HTML of the page because with larger sites, it can definitely just be a mess of code. So a nice little trick, if we go back to our browser here, and I'm going to make this just a little bit larger for a second. Now, in order to dig down into the HTML and find exactly where our article headline and summary is, I'm using the Chrome browser here, but other browsers have this feature as well. But we can just right-click on what we want. So I'm going to right-click on that headline. And now I'm going to click on Inspect. And that will allow us to inspect this element. So this inspection popped up here on the right side. Let me see if I can make this text a little bit larger here so that we can see. So now we can see that we have all of our HTML here, but the one that's highlighted is the one that we right-clicked and inspected. So we can see whenever I hover over this, it actually highlights that in the browser. So if I hover over the H2, then it shows me all of the H2. If I hover over the article, it shows me all of the article, and so on. So if I go to the body, then it highlights everything. So this is a nice way to narrow down exactly what it is you're looking for. So like we saw before, our article headlines are within a div with a class of article, and then we have an h2 tag and then an anchor tag. So first let's grab the article div. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to close this and go back to the HTML or the scraper here. And now instead of match, I'm going to call this article instead. And now in the find method here, I'm going to find a div with a class of article. So to do that, you can say div.article. And if you're familiar with CSS selectors, that's how we would find that with CSS selectors as well. So if I save that and run it, then we can see that I grabbed the first div with the class article and printed out its text. And we can see that it gives us the headline and the summary within that div. So now we have that first article. We can just search this element just like we search the entire HTML object. So let's say I wanted to access the headline and the summary individually. So to do that, we can simply say, I'm going to overwrite that part there. I'm going to say headline is equal to, and now we're going to use this article, and I'll say article.find, and within the article I want to find the h2, and I'll also say first is equal to true here. And now I'm going to copy this line and paste it in below. And I'm also going to grab the summary. So the summary is the article.find, and we want to find the first paragraph tag. So now let's print those out individually. So I will print out, let me give some space here. So I will print out that headline, and I will also print out the summary. So if I save that and run it, then you can see that we have those matched elements. If I just wanted the text, then I could either say headline.text here, or I could even just add it onto the end of my query here. So I'll say .text after that find, .text after that find, save that and run it. And now we can see we got the article 1 headline and the summary for article 1. Okay, so now that we have this information from one article, we can most likely reuse this to parse the information from all of the articles. So let me change the first search here to where I'm finding all of the divs with the class of article to not just return the first one. So I will rename this here. I'm going to say articles is equal to html.find div.article. I'm going to take away that first equals true. So now that should return a list of articles. So now let's loop over those articles and reuse the same code that we had before to access the headline and the summary. So right underneath here, I'm just going to say for article in articles, and then we will use this same code here to find the headline and the summary. So let me spread that out a little bit, and let me save this and run it. And now we can see that we have the headline and the summary for both of those articles instead of just the first one. Now, if those are bunched together, if I put a just blank print here, then it'll spread those out a bit. And now we can see we have those spread out. Okay, so now we got the headline and the summary for every article in our simple.html file here. So that's good. So we're starting to see how this would be useful for getting information from websites. So now let's do something similar, but with an actual website. So I have my personal website pulled up here in the browser that we saw before. Let me make this a little larger here. And like I said, I have a list of posts here, and all of these posts have a title, a summary, and then an embedded video. So let's say that we wanted to write a script that would go out and grab those titles and summaries and links to those videos. So first things first, we're going to need to import a different class from request HTML. When we're grabbing data from a URL, we need to use something like an HTML session. So let me make this a little larger here. And up at the top, instead of just importing HTML, I'm also going to import HTML session, okay? And now let's get the source code from my website. So I'm just going to comment out this with open that we have here before, because I'm going to do one more thing with this file later. And now I'm just going to overwrite everything that we had previously. So now to get the source from my website, I'm going to say session is equal to HTML session, And now I can say R is equal to, that'll be for response. I'm going to say session.get, and I want to get the homepage of my website. So I will just copy that and paste that in there. So that uses the request library to get a response from our website. And this R variable is going to be the response object. Now, if you are familiar with the request library, then you can pretty much use this like you would use a response from that request library. So we could check the status code, we could get the content in bytes, get the content in Unicode, all kinds of different stuff. Now, if you'd like to see more of what you can do with the request library itself, then you can watch my video where I go into more detail about these request and response objects. So I'll leave a link to that video in the description section below if anyone is interested. But what we're interested in for this video is the HTML attribute. So I'm going to print r.html. If I save that and run it, then when I printed that out, that HTML attribute gives us access to the HTML object for that website. So that HTML object is just like the HTML object that we interacted with just a second ago. It's just the same as us setting this HTML equals HTML with the source. So we can use that to find what we're looking for on my website. So just like before, let's start off by grabbing one video's information first, and then we'll loop through those to get the information for all of the videos. So to grab the first headline and snippet, let's inspect my website and see what the structure looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and enlarge this here. So just like I did in the simple example, I'm going to right click on this headline and then go to inspect. And now we can see here our article headline is in an H2 tag with a class of entry title. Okay, so that's how we're going to find that. If I right click on the description here and inspect that, then we can see that this is a paragraph tag inside of a div with the class entry content. Now both the heading and the summary are both inside of this article tag here. So this article tag is for one post. So if I hover over that, then you can see it just highlights that first post, but not the second one. If I hover over the second one, then it highlights that post. So first, let's just grab that entire first article that contains all of the information that we want. So to grab that first article in the source code, let me go back to our script here. We can simply just say, I'm going to overwrite this print statement here. I'm going to say article is equal to r.html.find, and we are going to find that article tag. And I just want the first one for now while we're messing with this. So I will say first is equal to true. And now I can print out that article.html. So I'll save that and run it. Okay, and this gives us all of the HTML of that first article. Now, I've actually liked using this library more than Beautiful Soup, but there was one thing I liked about Beautiful Soup that I haven't been able to find in this library, and that's some sort of prettify or pretty print method. Now, I don't think that this library has anything that will print this HTML out nice and neat, but if it can do that and I've somehow missed it, then just let me know in the comment section below, because I think that would be some good functionality. So this isn't the neatest HTML here, but if we read through this, then we will be able to see that it's the HTML from that first article. So just to see this a bit better, I will go ahead and format this so that we can read it. I have an online formatter pulled up here in my browser, and I'm just going to use this to pretty up our HTML. So I'm going to paste that into the HTML input part and then click on beautify, and you can see that over here it formats it nicely. So now I'm going to copy that prettied up HTML and paste this in here to Sublime, and also let me set the syntax as HTML. Okay, so now we have our pretty printed HTML. Okay, so now that we have the HTML for this article, now we can figure out how we want to grab what we want to grab. So we want to grab the headline, summary, and YouTube video link from this article here. So let's start with the title. So like I said before, this is in this H2 tag with the class of entry title, and then we have this link here, and the link, this is a little long here. Actually, this would probably be more readable if I turn on word wrap. okay? But we can see that this is the link here, and the text of that link is the article headline. And actually, this link has its own class, so that makes it a little easier on us. It says entry title link. So let's just grab the text of that class. So I'm going to go back to our script here. And now, instead of printing out that article.html, I'm going to use it to find our headline. So I'm going to say headline is equal to article.find. And within that article, we want to find a class of entry. I can actually just go back to the HTML here so I don't screw it up. Entry title link, I will copy that and paste that in. And we just want to grab the first result. So we'll say first is equal to true. And we just want to grab the text from that match. So now if I print out headline, if I save that and run it, then we can see that we got the first headline from the first post. Okay, so now that we got the title of my latest post, now let's get the summary text for that post. So let's go back to the HTML for our article here, and let me scroll down until I see what looks like the description, and this is it right here. So our summary text is within this paragraph tag, and that paragraph is inside of a div with a class of entry content. So I'm going to copy that, and now back in our scraper, let's just copy this here and paste this in. And instead, I'm going to call this summary. And that summary is going to be, if I copy that entry content, it is going to be a class of entry content. And then it is the paragraph tag within entry content. So now if I save that and run it, then now we have our headline here. And then right below this, it's a bit bunched together, but this is the description of that first post. Now again, the syntax that we're using inside of this find method is the same syntax that you would use in CSS. So if you're not familiar with how that works, then that's where that comes from. Okay, so lastly, we need to get the link to the video for that post. Now this one is going to be a little more difficult, but I wanted to show you this because sometimes parsing information can be a bit ugly and require you to take several steps before getting your final desired result. So if we look back at the HTML of the article, then let's see if we can find where this video is. So it's actually down here within this iframe. This is that embedded video here. So let me just grab the HTML of that iframe so that we can see just that. So back in the scraper here, I'm going to say, let's see, I'll just call this vid_source is equal to article.find. I'll just copy that from above. We want to find the iframe within that article, and I will say first is equal to true. And now I'm going to print the vid source.html. And I'm going to copy, or I'm going to comment out these other print statements for now. So I'm going to save that and run it. Okay, so this is the HTML for our embedded video. So if we inspect this iframe here, if we look at the source attribute here, this source is has a link to the embedded version of the video, but it's not a direct link to the video itself. We can see it goes to youtube.com/embed / this video ID here, and then it has a long URL after that. But if you know how YouTube videos work, they all have an ID for the video, and the ID for this video is right here. It's everything before this question mark. So the question mark in a URL specifies where the parameters start. So it's not actually part of the ID. So with that ID, we can create a link to the video ourselves. So we need to parse that ID from that URL. So first, we need to grab that URL from the iframe, which is in the source attribute. So this is pretty simple to do. So instead of using this HTML of this vid source element here, we can instead access the attributes by saying vidsource.attrs for attributes. So if I run that, then we get a dictionary of the attributes for that iframe element. So to grab the source, we can just access that like any other Python dictionary. So I'm just going to access the source key of that dictionary. So now I'll run that, and now we can see we get that YouTube link. And now we can see that that gives us the entire YouTube URL for that embedded video. So I'm going to move the attributes and source key up on the previous line here so that we have our URL in a single variable. So what I mean by that, I'm just going to cut out the dot attributes and the source there. And I'm going to just put that up here on the previous line. So this vid source variable is equal to this link here. So if I run this, we should just get the same result. Okay, so now that we have this URL, we're going to have to parse this URL string to grab the ID of that video. And we'll break this up into several lines. So first, we can see that our video ID, which is right here, comes directly after a /. So let's split our string based on /. So I'm going to comment out, actually I'll just remove that print statement there, and I'll say vid underscore ID is equal to vid source dot split, and we're going to split our URL on /. And now I can print this vid ID. So if I save that and run it, then now we have a list of values from our string that were split on that /. Now, if you've never used the split method on a string, basically, like I said, it just splits the string into a list of values based on the character that you specify. So now we can see that our URL is broken into several parts based on where the /s were. So if we look at the items of our list here, we're looking for our video ID, which is right here. So which index is that located in? So this is the 0 index here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is within the 4th index of this list. So let's specify that we only want the 4th index of that list. So right after the split, I'm just going to access the 4th index there, save that and run it. And now we have just that video ID with the other URL parameters. But we still don't have the ID itself. So like I said before, the question mark specifies where the parameters for the URL begin, and the video ID is before that. So if we do another split on the question mark, then it should separate those out. So I'll go to a new line so that we aren't making this one too complicated, and I will just say vidID is equal to vidID dot split, and we want to split this value on a question mark. So I will split that, and if I run that now, then we can see that now we have two items. It's split by our video ID, and then the second value in our list here is all of the URL parameters. But we don't care about those parameters, we just want the video ID. So we want to grab that first element of the list, which is at index 0. So I'll put an index of 0 there, save that and run it. And now we have our video ID. Okay, so I know that that was a lot of parsing, but sometimes, website source code just doesn't have the information that you want in the most accessible way. So I wanted to show you how you might go about getting the data that you want. Okay, so now that we have that YouTube ID, now we can create our own YouTube link using that video ID. So the way that YouTube links are formatted are like this. Let me make this a little smaller here so we have some more room. So I'm going to remove that print statement there. And now I'm going to say YouTube link is equal to, and I'm just going to make this an F string. So the way that YouTube links to videos is like this. So we can do https youtube.com/watch. And now for our YouTube parameters, we want a question mark. V is equal to, and now V is going to be equal to the video ID. So since we're using an F string, we can just put that in there. Now I'm using F strings to format the string, but those are only available in Python 3.6 and above. If you're using an older version of Python, then you can use the format method. And I have a separate video on both F strings and formatted strings if anyone needs to see how to do that. So I'll leave a link to those videos in the description section below. So if I print out that YouTube link that we just created, now we can see that we have a link here that should go to our video. So if I copy this and paste it into my browser, then it should open up that video in the browser. Okay, let me pause that. Okay, so we can see that it opened up that video in the browser using that link that we created. Okay, so that's perfect. So now we've scraped all of the information that we want from that first article. So just like in our earlier example, now that we've got that information for one article, now we can loop over all of the articles and get that information for all of them. So to do this, I will just come up here to the top where we found that first article. And instead, I'm going to call this articles and take out this first equals to true, because we don't just want the first article, now we want all of them. And now we can say for article in articles, and we can reuse all of the same logic that we used before, but we'll just put it inside of that for loop. So now for each article that we found, we are parsing out the headline, and let me print that out. We are parsing out the summary, and I will uncomment out that print statement. And then we're doing all of this parsing here to also grab a YouTube link. So now, and also let me put a blank print statement here at the bottom so that we have some separation between these articles. Okay, so now if I run this, then we should be able to scroll up here. Okay, so now we have all of that information. This is the first article here. Here's the headline. Here is the description, and here is the YouTube link. And it should do this for every one of the articles on the site, or at least on the homepage. Okay, so that's good, but sometimes you're going to run into situations where you might be missing some data. And if that happens, then it could break your script to scrape the website. Now, maybe you're pulling down a list of items and one is missing an image or something that you thought would be there. So to show what this looks like, I'm going to go to one of my older posts that doesn't have a YouTube video associated with it and see what happens. So blog posts from a long time ago don't have videos. So if I go back here, let's see, I'm going to close down the inspection. Now I think on, let's see, I think it's like page 14 or so of my website. Let me go to page 14 here. So if I scroll down here a little bit, okay, so I have an old post here from 2014 where I made a doll bed for my niece and just wrote a quick article about how I threw that together, but the post doesn't have a YouTube video associated with it. And there are a few more of my old posts like this as well. So let's see what happens if I try to scrape page 14 here of my website. So I'm going to copy this URL and go back to our script, and the website that we're getting, I'm going to paste in, and that now we're going to try to scrape page 14. So I'm going to save that and run it. And if I do that, if I scroll up here, we can see that it got the headline and summary and link for the first post on that page. But for the doll bed post, we have a traceback here, and it's saying that it can't access the attributes of the vid source. And that's to be expected because there is no video in that post. So when we try to access the attributes of that video, then it's not going to have a value and it's going to throw an error. So to fix this, we can just put in a try except block that will check for errors. And if it does, run into an error parsing a video, then it will just skip that part of the post. So to do this, I'm going to make my output a little smaller there. So to do this, I'm just going to create a try except block where we are trying to parse out the video. And in the try section of this, I'm going to take all of our code that parses the video and creates the link, and I'm going to paste that into the try section of the try block. And for the exception, if it runs into an exception, then I'm just going to say that the YouTube link is going to be equal to none. Now, again, if you're unfamiliar with try except blocks and would like to see a more detailed video about that concept, then I do have a video specifically on that. So I'll leave a link to that video in the description section below if anyone would like to learn more about that. Okay, so now if I rerun this same code from before, if I look at the output now, then whenever it gets to the post without a video, then we can see that it just prints none instead, and then moves on to the other posts. Now that didn't print a summary either, and the reason for that is because the first paragraph of that post is an image instead of the summary. So, we're not going to mess with that. So instead, let me go back to the home page and rerun that code to make sure it's still working. Okay, and the code is still working for our home page as well. Okay, so now that we've scraped the information that we wanted, you can save this in any way that you'd like. Right now, we're just printing this out to our terminal here, and maybe that's fine for you, but you can also save this to a file or a CSV or whatever you'd like. So for example, real quick, let's say that we wanted to scrape this page and save it to a CSV file. So we've already done the hard part of getting the information that we want. So to save it to a CSV file, we could simply come up here to the top, and I will say import CSV. And then here towards the top of our file before our for loop, we can just open up a CSV file. Now, I'm not going to go into as much detail here, but we could use a context manager here. But the way that this is currently set up, I think it's just a little bit quicker and easier to just open up the file directly. So I'm going to say CSV file is equal to open, and I'm going to open a new file. I'm just going to call this cms_scrape.csv, and we want to open this in write mode. And now we can write some header lines to set up our CSV file. So I'm going to say CSV_writer is equal to CSV.writer, and we want to pass in that CSV file. And now we can write our header lines into our CSV file. So basically what we're going to be putting into the CSV. So I'm going to say CSV writer dot write row, and we want to pass in a list of what we want to write. So first we're going to write the headline, second we're going to write the summary, and third we're going to write the video. That's all the information that we posted from those posts, or that we parsed from those posts, sorry. Now, again, I'm not going into as much detail here, but if you've never worked with CSV files before and don't know exactly what's going on here, then I do have a separate video that goes into deeper detail into CSV files. So I'll also be sure to put a link to that video in the description section below as well. But for now, within our for loop, where we're getting our scraped information, let's just write that information to our CSV file. So at the very bottom of our loop, I'm going to copy this CSV writer here. At the very bottom of our loop, I'm going to say CSV_writer dot write row, and we want to write the headline and the summary and the YouTube_ link. Okay, and lastly, here on the outside, let me close the output there so we can see a little bit better. Lastly, since we didn't use a context manager for this CSV file, we need to close our file at the end of the script. So I'm going to say CSV_file.close. Okay, so now whenever we run our script, it should create a CSV file. So let me go back to my Finder window here. And this is the CSV file that I created at the very beginning of the video to show you what our final product would look like. Let me erase that and delete that. And now let me run our script that we just wrote. So that is running. It printed out all this information in the terminal. But also, if I open Finder back up, then we can see that that CSV file was created again. So this is the old one here. Let me close that down. And this is the new one that we just created. So again, let me format this a little better here. I will put the columns to be size of 300 and put the word wrap one. So now we can see that we have all of that data that we scraped available here in a spreadsheet. So now it's a bit easier to read all of that information that we pulled down. So that's kind of cool that we wrote a script to go out to that website, parse out all of that information, and save it to this CSV file. So this would be extremely useful for data collection or putting together reports or whatever it is that you need. Okay, so everything that we've done in this video so far is stuff that we also did in the Beautiful Soup video. But let me show you a couple of extra things that we can do with Request HTML that we didn't do with Beautiful Soup. So first of all, it's a common thing to just want to get all of the links on a site. So perhaps you're writing a crawler and want to visit each page on a site or something like that. Well, that's so common that there's actually a links attribute in the HTML object that has a set of all the links on a page. So let's go back to our script here and see what this would look like. Now, I'm going to close out our output there. I'm just going to comment everything out here. And also I'm going to comment out our CSV stuff. I'm just going to work with this website data for now. So let me paste that in. Okay, so like I was saying, it's so common to want to just get all of the links on a website that HTML or that request HTML makes this very easy for us. So to do this, I can simply print r.html.links. So if I save that and run it, then this gives us a set of all of the links on a website. Now, this is a bit difficult to read, so you can actually loop over that as well. So I could say for link in r.html.links, and for every link, we can just print out that link. So if I save that and run it, then we can see that now this prints out those links in a bit easier to read. Now, I don't think that I have any relative links on my page, but if you do have relative links and want to instead get absolute URL for your links, then instead of using links here, you could use absolute links. So absolute underscore links. If I save that and run it, this is pretty much going to look the same, but if you have relative links, then it prints out the absolute path for those links instead of the relative path. Now, another really cool feature with request HTML is the ability to grab text that's dynamically generated by JavaScript. Now, I don't think something like Beautiful Soup has a way to do this out of the box. So let's take a look at an example. So if you remember, that first HTML file that I had saved on my machine had some text that was dynamically created with JavaScript. So let's go back and take a look at that again. So I'm going to open up the HTML. And I will also open that up in the browser as well. So let me resize this. So we can see here at the bottom of the page, it says this is text generated by JavaScript. So if I look in my browser and inspect this text, so let's see what this looks like. Then it just looks like text in a paragraph tag within the footer whenever I actually inspect that in the browser. But if we actually look at this in the HTML, let me make this a bit larger here so that we can see. If we actually look at this in the HTML, then we can see here is our entire footer here. We don't actually have that text in our footer, but I have some JavaScript here at the bottom of the page that adds that text to the footer. But the page actually has to render and run that JavaScript before the text gets added to the footer. So usually libraries have trouble getting dynamic data like this, but we can do this with request HTML. So first, let's look at the result before we render the page. So I'm going to make this large again and go back to our scraper here. And I'm going to uncomment out the part where we were working with that simple HTML document. And I'm just going to comment out everything beneath it. So let me put in some blank lines here so that we have some space. So like I was saying, let's look at the result that we get before the page is rendered. So I'm going to say match is equal to html.find, and I'm going to find the footer, and I will say first is equal to true. And now I'm going to print that match.html. So let me save that and run it. And if we run that, then we can see that the dynamic text isn't included in our response here. But if we want to render the page in order to get the dynamic data, then it's simple as coming up here underneath the HTML here and just simply saying html.render. So now the first time that you run this, it might need to download a few things from Chromium in order to use this functionality. So don't worry if you see it downloading some stuff here, but I'm going to run this. And I've already run this command once on my machine, so it doesn't need to go out and download anything, but you might see yours downloading something at this point. But once it's downloaded and you rerun it, then we can see that the text generated by JavaScript is now included here in our footer. So I think it's really cool that HTML or that request HTML allows us to do this out of the box. Okay, now the last thing that I want to show you with this library is its ability to do asynchronous requests. Now, if you don't know the difference between synchronous and asynchronous, basically when you make a synchronous request, you have to wait until we get a response back before we continue on with our script. But when we make an asynchronous request, we can move on and do other stuff in our script while we wait on the response. So I have another file pulled up here, and I'm going to show you both a synchronous version and an asynchronous version of getting responses from a certain website. So let's look at the synchronous version first, and we can time this. So here I have a script that goes and does some synchronous requests to some websites. So the website that I'm using for this test is called httpbin.org, and it was written by the same person who wrote the requests and request HTML libraries. So it's a cool website that allows you to test different requests and responses. And for this example, I'm going to use a route that simulates a delayed response depending on the number that we pass into the URL. So in this synchronous version, we're just going to these URLs and printing out the results. So we're going to a route that is going to be delayed by 1 second here, another route that's going to be delayed by 2 seconds, and a third route that is going to be delayed by 3 seconds. And I'm starting a timer before the first website and then getting the time after all of the websites have printed their responses to see how long that took. Now, since this is running synchronously, it's going to go make the first request and wait for a response, then make the second request and wait for a response, and then make the third request and wait for the response. So we can imagine that this should probably take a little over 6 seconds since 1 plus 2 plus 3 is equal to 6, and those are all of our delays. So if I run this, then we can see that we got the first website back, now the second, and now the third, and it tells us that it took about 6.6 seconds, so that's about what we would expect. Okay, so now let's take a look at the asynchronous version of this same test. So I have this different file open here called async snippets. So we can see that there is a bit more code here, but let's look through this here. So first we're importing async HTML session, and then towards the middle of our script here, we're creating an async function for each website that we want to visit. And I'm not going to go into async code in this video. That topic probably requires several videos just on its own. But within these async functions, we're saying await and then returning and then getting these URLs. So if I scroll down here a little bit, then we have this line here. Results is equal to asynchronous session.run, and we are running all three of these async functions here: get delay 1, get delay 2, get delay 3. So that is going to go and get the responses from all of those sites, but it's going to do this asynchronously, which means that as it's waiting on one response, it's going to go ahead and move on and try to get a response from the next one. And once it has responses from all of those, we're looping over the responses right here and printing out those results. So in this case, we're just printing out the URLs. And then we are ending the timer here and printing out how long it took in total. So in this case, we can imagine that the execution time is going to be around 3 seconds, because when it makes the request with a 1 second delay, it's going to move on to the next without waiting for a response like it did synchronously. So basically, it will make requests for all of them around the same time and then manage results as they come in. And since our longest request should take only about 3 seconds, then that's how long it should take us to get some results back. So if we run this, then let me wait for the results here. Okay, so we can see that it took just a little over 3 seconds. So that's about half of the time that it took to run synchronously. So if you have a lot of websites to parse, then doing it asynchronously could save you a ton of time. So if you can imagine you had to crawl, 10 different APIs that took 3 seconds each to compute a response, then if you did that synchronously, then that could take over 30 seconds. But if you did it asynchronously, then it would take around 3 seconds. So it's definitely something to think about if you're doing something like that. Okay, so I think that is going to do it for this video. Hopefully now you have a pretty good idea for how you can go out and scrape information from websites. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that if you want data from a large website like Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or something like that, then it may be beneficial for you to see whether or not they have a public API. So public APIs allow those sites to serve up data to you in a more efficient way. And sometimes they don't appreciate it if you try to scrape their data manually. They'd rather you use an API instead. But it's usually those larger websites that have public APIs like that. So if you want data from a smaller website, then you'll usually have to do something like we did here. Now, I also want to point out that you should be considerate when scraping websites. Computer programs allow us to send a lot of requests very quickly. So be aware that you might be bogging down someone's server if you aren't careful. So try to keep that in mind. After this tutorial, try not to go out and hammer my website with a ton of different requests through your program. And that goes for other websites as well. And some websites will even monitor if they're getting hit quickly and can block your program or IP address if you're hitting them too fast. Some websites will actually try to block bots completely. But that's another good thing about Request HTML is that it spoofs a user agent for us to make it seem like a real web browser. So it's hard for people to tell that you're using a program in this case. Okay, but other than that, if anyone has any questions about what we covered in this video, then feel free to ask in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer those. And if you enjoy these tutorials and would like to support them, then there are several ways you can do that. The easiest way is to simply like the video and give it a thumbs up. And also it's a huge help to share these videos with anyone who you think would find them useful. And if you have the means, you can contribute through Patreon, and there's a link to that page in the description section below. Be sure to subscribe for future videos, and thank you all for watching.